All right, again, the code I put in the chat, ZRMYH. Any questions before we get started? All right. So this section, 7.3, it's the last section of chapter of topic 7. So there's only 3 subsections here. It is all about climate mitigation and adaptation. That's why I asked the question that I did for the bell work. And we're going to understand by the end of this what this difference between climate mitigation and adaptation is. So the first one that we're going to tackle is mitigation. And essentially, climate mitigation means reduction of the things that cause climate change, all right? And what that specifically means is that we are trying to reduce or keep at the same levels the greenhouse gas emissions, and also working on removing those greenhouse gases. So what are some examples of greenhouse gases? Awesome, carbon dioxide, great. What are some other greenhouse gases? SOxes and NOxes, a little bit, right? We know that nitrogen dioxide or NO, the NOxes do contribute, definitely. Water vapor is a huge one. Methane, good. Ozone to a lesser extent, but methane is a big one. So is azotgase. No, but the big ones that you need to be concerned about: water, methane, carbon dioxide. Good, thank you, Alanis. So all of those things are things we want to reduce and remove. And so when we talk about mitigation tactics, yes, good, the fluorocarbons as well, forgot about those. As far as mitigation tactics are concerned, this is a really interesting triangle to take a look at and get your head around. What we see here on this triangle is that if we do mitigation over adaptation, and we'll get into what adaptation is in just a few moments here, but if we do mitigation, climate mitigation, where we're reducing everything, all right, that is going to cost a lot. Right? That costs a lot to reduce greenhouse gas emissions because we're talking about using alternative sources of fuels. It costs a lot to remove carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, all right? The cost of the impacts is much lower. So we spend a lot mitigating, but we end up having to spend less in terms of the impacts of climate change, all right? Now, if we take no action, right, if we don't mitigate at all, the cost of the impacts is really, really high, all right? And it doesn't cost anything if we take no action as far as adaptations are concerned. But we will talk about adaptations. So here are some strategies for actually doing climate mitigation. We can, of course, reduce energy consumption. A lot of different ways to reduce energy consumption are those ways that we've been talking about with the solar energy activity, using that home energy calculator to figure out how you're using electricity and other energy in your house. We can see here that heating your home, we saw that when we did the activity. It takes up, this is according to the Department of Energy, so the US government, in 2015, made this estimate that 42% of your utilities, meaning electricity and gas, is due to home heating. That's a lot, all right? So if you can bump that thermostat down a little bit, then you're gonna save a lot of electricity and a lot of fuel. Water heating is a pretty big component. So is cooling, air conditioning, fans, everything else. Lighting and refrigeration make up the other big components. So we understand that by reducing our energy consumption, we are actually mitigating climate change. Reducing NOxes Agricultural NOxes and methane. Here we see the livestock. All right, so that's to remind you that livestock are a huge contributor to agricultural NOxes and methane. And directly, livestock are a contributor to methane. Indirectly, they are a contributor to NOxes because a lot of that gets emitted through the production of fertilizer. A lot of NOxes also get emitted through transportation. And transportation is a key to agriculture because you have to move things from one place to another in order to get food from where it's produced to where it's going to be consumed. Another way is, of course, alternative to fossil fuels, and we've talked a lot about this. You guys have done presentations about alternatives to fossil fuels. Geoengineering is a new term. Does anyone know what geoengineering refers to? And don't just give me examples from the bottom right, but generally, what do we mean when we say geoengineering? That is a book definition. Thank you. So what does that mean? What are we doing when we're doing geoengineering? Yes, I know my wand. That is definitely a definition. Awesome. Thank you, Zainab. So technology where we manipulate the environment, absolutely. One example is changing the oceans. We are engineering to fit the Earth's needs. Absolutely. A lot of people are scared of this, and I think rightfully so. Geoengineering, it's not a fantastic image because it's a little dark in places, but I hope that you can read it. But this summarizes really well a lot of different ways that geoengineering is done. These are real things. This is not just, some sort of pipe dream. These are things that we could actually do, and some of them are already being worked on. Now, there's two aspects to geoengineering. There's reducing the incoming solar radiation, all right? And there's also removing the carbon dioxide. So one way is to actually put what are called aerosols, reflective aerosols, in the air. So these are particles that would actually reflect sunlight so that it doesn't actually impact the surface of the Earth. And you just spray them with a plane and you put them into the air. Nothing bad could ever result from that. Thank you, Zainab, for pointing out that that sounds dangerous. Another thing is cloud seeding. Cloud seeding is a little bit less horrible sounding, and that involves putting particles into the air that clouds would form around, because clouds need some sort of particle in order to form. So this would be basically putting those particles in the air so more clouds form. The more clouds there are, the more reflection of sunlight there's going to be. Also, putting a foreign object into the atmosphere. Space mirrors, it's a real thing. It would be putting large mirrors into orbit around the Earth and reflecting sunlight back into space. This was actually pitched as an idea, not a space mirror, but more of a floating helicopter type huge mirror for the World Cup in, I think it's 2022 in Qatar, in Doha, Qatar, where they were talking about actually having a huge space shield that would give a shadow to the soccer fields while they were playing soccer for the World Cup, because the World Cup is scheduled to be in a very hot place during one of the hottest times of the year. So they were trying to figure out what the best way to do that was. They all do sound very science fiction-y, but they are very much science fact. They are very much things that engineers are truly considering. All right, less of the science fiction and more of the actual what's happening. All right, what's happening on the ground is the carbon dioxide removal. These are more advanced technologies. Forestation really isn't a technology, it's just planting forests, okay? Carbon dioxide capture from air plus storage. This is actually happening in a lot of places, not with these big panels so much, but carbon dioxide is being captured from the air. That's a carbon scrubber. The storage piece is a little bit more difficult to figure out. Carbon dioxide capture from fossil fuels directly. So when the fossil fuels are burned, that's the carbon scrubbers, and then stored back in the places underground where they were originally drilled up from, which it's like, why even bother? Why not just leave it in the ground? But, and then this other tactic, ocean iron fertilization, that we'll talk about a little bit later as well, where you throw iron into deep ocean waters, typically away from land. And what it causes is it causes intentional eutrophication. Now, we understand eutrophication to be generally bad. And in the Gulf of Mexico and other places that are coastlines, it is generally bad because that affects human health and it affects the health of fisheries. But in the deep ocean, what it does is it helps to bring algae to the surface. And then it allows those algae to capture carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and trap it in the ocean. So it is a way of doing doing carbon capture and storage and harnessing nature to do so, as long as it's away from fisheries and it's away from coastlines. Any questions about crazy geoengineering methods? The last bullet point here, keep the questions coming. Mr. Tout or me will get to them. Reduction of NOx emissions, that's mostly from transportation, as you may remember. So cutting down on all of these emissions from people driving cars, from trucks. We're seeing that NOx emissions are going way down during this quarantine. All sorts of places have reduced smog, especially Los Angeles. There are some great pictures of Los Angeles where you can see clearly downtown, and very few people have ever seen downtown clearly because there seems to always be smog. These are lessons that we're learning right now, that we can repair nature. Maybe it'll require some extreme behavior, but we can mitigate climate change. All right, other mitigation strategies, and this specifically is for carbon dioxide removal, which I will refer to as CDR. So removing carbon dioxide is CDR. This is a map of where UN RED, all right, which is an organization, it's a United Nations organization trying to protect and enhance carbon sinks, meaning places where carbon dioxide can be stored, mostly through forests. As long as the land is managed so that deforestation doesn't happen, then that carbon dioxide can be stored in these areas. These are hotspots for deforestation that can be reversed. Now you notice one of the major hotspots in the world, the Amazon rainforest in Brazil, is not on here. I don't know precisely why it's not on here. I imagine that it's because there are all sorts of other programs in order to try to reduce deforestation, and probably Brazil doesn't want UN RED to be within their borders. But in all of these other places, there are vulnerable forests that are being saved in order to try to capture carbon. Using biomass as a fuel source is a great way for carbon dioxide removal to happen, because all of these things grow and they use carbon dioxide when they grow. And when we use them as a fuel source, we can control, sometimes we can control where that carbon dioxide ends up. And so all of these various organic sources are often combined to make wood pellets or biofuel pellets, and those biofuel pellets can be burned in special furnaces, especially if you attach a carbon dioxide scrubber to them. So speaking of carbon dioxide scrubbers, here we have using carbon capture and storage, and this is showing us generally how that happens. This is a general diagram where you take that carbon dioxide, you scrub it out, and you inject it into the very places where those fossil fuels originally came from. This is very controversial. It has not been scientifically proven to work over a long period of time. Yes, you can pump that carbon dioxide out there, but ultimately it's going to leak no matter how well you seal it up. And so we have not found scientifically that this is a long-term storage solution, but it is an idea. And in all honesty, we're pretty desperate for ideas. And so I mentioned the Fertilizing Oceans piece, all right? And this goes into a little bit of detail about how it actually works. I mentioned that they sprinkle the iron, it stimulates the growth of the algae that draw carbon dioxide, the algae die, sinks into the sea, and as long as it sinks 1,000 feet or lower, then that carbon, you notice that big should word right there, carbon should be trapped for decades. We don't have enough evidence to show that that is definitely the case, but that's the theory. Increasing upwellings is something really interesting as well. There's a lot of nutrients that are at the ocean floor because lots of things die. If you can increase upwellings of those nutrients, of those deep ocean nutrients, by using air or something else, you can basically suck it up to the top. You increase those nutrients, and so you can stimulate algal growth, and you can also feed your fish. But yeah, this one is less focused on carbon dioxide. The other reason to do this would be to stimulate algal growth so that you have eutrophication happening. All right, that was incorrect. Let's go back here. Okay. So what I'd like you to do is you're gonna have 3 minutes to identify 2 climate mitigation strategies and describe their effectiveness. All right, remember, identify is just saying what they are. You don't have to explain, but I do want you to describe each one's effectiveness, in your opinion, in just a few words. It doesn't have to be long.
Mgomo iro totamanengoma tisuvana vemgomo iro totamanembira tisuvana vemgomo iro totamanehosho
10 seconds. All right, time's up. Make sure you submit your answer. I will not be showing names. All right, so reducing energy consumption and alternative fossil fuels, excellent. Just skimming here, the effectiveness. All right, I was looking for a little bit more opinion here, okay? So, but this is great. So these are beneficial for the earth and atmosphere. Good. Ocean iron fertilization and cloud seeding. All right, good. I like in using your opinion here. If the technology is properly advanced, good. Using biomass, reducing NOxes. A lot of geoengineering seems dangerous. I agree with you. Solar, wind, small hydro, helping cities develop bus rapid transit, using less electricity in your house, and geoengineering. Good, good, good. So, something to keep in mind when considering these different mitigation strategies is that the emission that we have, the emission of greenhouse gases that we as humanity have put into the atmosphere is going to continue to affect us for decades. So what that means is no matter what we do, if we stopped carbon dioxide output right now, and that's actually, that's this blue line right here, okay? So we're right here. If we stopped right now, temperature, so right, global surface temperature change would still go up. It would only level off in like another 20 years because that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has what's called momentum, all right? It has temperature momentum. It's going to keep trapping that heat. Those greenhouse gases will keep trapping that heat for decades. And so we could stop emitting carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases right now, and we would still feel the effect. Now you see that eventually temperature starts to eke down, but that's if we stopped now, all right? And hey, we did. I mean, we practically stopped right now, not necessarily for the right reasons. We didn't mean to, but we have. So maybe this starts a trend. If it does not start a trend, if we do nothing, all right, if we go back to the way we've been doing things, the red line is the predictions. So what that means is that by the time that you guys are in your 60s and 70s, we're talking about almost a 3-degree temperature change. Okay, that's pretty significant. That's pretty bad. So any past emissions is going to affect us for decades, meaning that even if we stop now, we still will expect to see things increase, temperature increase on Earth. And it's important to keep in mind because people think that if you make changes now that you are going to see the effects of that, the positive effects immediately, and that is not the case. I'm going to allow you to watch this video on your own because I think it's better than me trying to stream it. But let's meet back here at the end of the video. So I think it's about 4.5 minutes long. And I want you to make note of the variety of strategies that are being, try to keep notes on at least 3 different strategies that are mentioned in this video. They mentioned quite a few. I'll wait a few more seconds to make sure everyone's back. I do apologize. I said mitigation, but I meant adaptation. That was very clearly about how we're adapting to climate change. And so what are some of the things that you wrote down about what they're talking about, the things that they're talking about doing? Either unmute or put it into the chat. Something about oyster reefs, good. So rebuilding some of our reefs in order to protect from coastal erosion. More land-based practices, okay? So changing how we adapt to climate change on land.
They're thinking about how to. They said that they wanted to go that they were designing up and up and in, and so trying to see how the salt is like in the farming land, how in the aquaculture, how all that's mixing, how they said that a land was like submerged, so I'm guessing with like a grassland was submerged, so I'm guessing that the grassland started, um the water was underneath it. So something like that.
So thank you, Misan. A lot of sea level rise leading to a change in how we can approach aquaculture. There's also issues we saw with flooding. And so you saw some good video about how flooding affects our daily lives, especially in Miami. I know some of you have folks in Miami and in that area, and they are feeling the effects of climate change more significantly than probably anywhere else in the United States at this moment. Good. So keep those things in mind. These are all climate adaptation strategies, all right? So we enact climate adaptation strategies. This is different from mitigation because we are using them to reduce the adverse effects of climate change, the negative effects of climate change, and to maximize any of the positive effects. We saw the other day that sometimes some places in the world can actually increase in agricultural productivity with climate change, all right? So there are some things that we can do to maximize those positive effects. One adaptation strategy is building up flood defenses. And so here we see seawalls being built up in order to prevent overtopping of storm surges from hurricanes or just general sea level rise from going into the community. Vaccination programs. This should sound very familiar. Right now, we are suffering from a pandemic that is hopefully in a year to a year and a half going to be something that we have a vaccine for. And the more that people get vaccinated, the less susceptible we are as a world community to pandemics. The seasonal flu is something that if we didn't have vaccines for, it would become a pandemic every year. But we have a vaccine for it, and so that helps us. Now what does climate change have to do with all this? Warmer temperatures mean that more people are hanging out together. We have high population growth. We have all sorts of as temperatures get higher, people get closer together. They're spending more time together. We're also talking about all sorts of issues with atmosphere being bad, so people spend more time inside. And as people spend more time inside, then it's really easy to spread diseases. Okay, so all of these things contribute to potential pandemics. And there's more and more evidence coming out that the current pandemic that we're suffering from is partially attributable to climate change. Vaccine programs refers to more of people just being vaccinated. New vaccines are being developed all the time for seasonal flu, for all sorts of different diseases that are discovered in different parts of the world. You know, it would be awesome if we had a vaccine, for example, for HIV. Okay, so there are scientists who are working on ways to inoculate people against things like HIV. And then there's desalinization plants. So desalinization plants take what out of water? Yeah, salt, which is really helpful for coastal communities that are suffering from climate change, because a lot of coastal communities are having problems getting fresh water, or a lot of non-coastal communities that are in drier places are having trouble getting fresh water. Well, if we can pull the salt out of water in an economic way, then we can provide fresh water for a lot of these communities. So desalinization, and this is a general diagram of one method of desalinization, can be done, and if it's done well, then we get the fresh water coming out one side, we get the brine, which is basically super, super salty water, coming out the other side, and we can provide fresh water to all sorts of different communities all over the world. This is a really interesting this is an interesting way to approach climate change. It's something that Israel has made a lot of progress with desalinization, but it is one of the adaptation strategies. More adaptation strategies include planting of crops and new crops in previously unsuitable climates. All right, these look like some carrots. Carrots are not new, but being able to plant maybe carrots and other crops and corn and other stuff in areas of the world that were previously unsuitable because the temperature wasn't right is an avenue that can be explored. Weather control is both mitigation and adaptation, because we know that if we seed clouds, we can increase reflectivity. We also know that this geoengineering strategy can be used to reverse some dry weather. If you seed a cloud, that increases potential precipitation in areas that are dry. And finally, migration. Migration is happening in lots of places already. It's not necessarily a positive strategy, it's a necessary strategy in lots of parts of the world where we just can't survive in particular locations anymore. All right, so please contribute to this collaboration board with an adaptation strategy and a reason why it should be used. So don't just name the adaptation strategy, please also give a reason why. I'll give you a couple minutes to do this. Excellent contributions. I'm going to move on in 5 seconds, and we're going to hit one more slide, and then we will finish tomorrow. All right. Great contributions. A lot of focus on vaccines, rightfully so. Okay, so the last slide that we'll cover today is about what's called adaptive capacity. Specifically with climate change, what it refers to is how flexible we are as a society to be able to adapt to climate change. all right? And it totally varies from country to country, from region to region. And some of it is based on assets, meaning money, also meaning capital, right? We see this is a fisher person here. They're trying to get some fish. Well, that's an asset, all right? So if they can still fish, then that's good. If they can't, then they have to adapt in some way, all right? Flexibility of saying, well, this person who fishes, well, maybe they can't fish anymore. What else can they do? How else can we train them? Could we train them to work on wind turbines? Could we train them to be in a different livestock industry? We have to remain organized. We have to make sure that we don't, as an entire world, we have to make sure that we don't section ourselves off. And so this one country is not going to talk to anybody else. All right, we have to remain organized. The United Nations does a great job at trying to make that happen. We have to do things like this, which is environmental education. We have to constantly learn about all these adaptation strategies and what we can do to make sure they happen in the future. And then agency. Let me pose this question to you. What do you consider agency to mean? I'm almost certain that you have heard this term from at least Mr. Ellenbogen at some point.
You said agency as in a group of organized people for like some sort of cause? Nope,
not that kind of agency, but that is also a definition of an agency. So if we provide agency to someone, we are empowering them to make a decision. Okay, so giving agency means that we are allowing people to determine how they are going to adapt themselves. Countries, regions, cities, all right? Miami needs to be empowered to be able to make decisions for itself that are going to be best for itself, but still be organized, still have the flexibility to deal with the issues at hand. All right, folks, have a wonderful Thursday. Stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy. Again, send me any music requests on Slack. I'll put that, let me get that link in there one more time so you don't have to scroll all the way up like I'm doing right now because, of course, I blew it away, but get on Slack.